So picture this. You're sitting on the couch. It's a Tuesday night. Maybe you're endlessly scrolling through a streaming service or just swiping through your phone, and you are just painfully, agonizingly bored.
Oh, we've all been there. The endless scroll.
Right. And you switch apps, you open up social media, hoping to, cure the feeling. But after 20 minutes of rapid-fire swiping, you somehow feel emptier and, I don't know, noticeably more bored than when you started.
Yeah, it almost compounds the feeling somehow.
Yeah. And there's actually a recent study out of Kent State University that looked at this exact modern scenario, and it found something that completely upends how we think about our own brains.
It's a really fascinating piece of research.
It is. So researchers tracked people's emotional states, right? And they found that 30 minutes of social media use actually increases your baseline level of boredom.
Wow.
But, and this is the wild part, 30 minutes of doing traditional homework significantly decreases it.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
Homework curing boredom.
Right. Homework actually cures the boredom, which means everything we've been taught about this feeling, that it's simply a lack of things to do, is just biologically backward.
Yeah, it's not a glitch in the system, and it's certainly not a character flaw.
Exactly. It is a highly evolved, deeply misunderstood alarm system. So, welcome to the Deep Dive Lab. Today, we are taking a stack of neuroscience papers, philosophical texts, and recent psychological studies to investigate a profoundly strange question. Why does boredom actually happen, and, what is it trying to force us to do?
And to really appreciate the biological machinery behind that alarm system, we first need to look at how spectacularly we have misdiagnosed this feeling throughout human history.
Oh, for sure. We've blamed it on everything, right?
Completely. Humanity spent centuries treating boredom like a spiritual failing or a social disease. If we rewind all the way to the 4th century, we find early Christian monks living out in the Egyptian desert.
Okay, the desert. Not exactly a high-stimulation environment.
Right, exactly. They were dedicating their lives to solitary prayer. Yet they began documenting this overwhelming, crushing sense of spiritual sluggishness and this physical restlessness. They actually called it acedia, or the noonday demon.
Wait, the noonday demon? That sounds so dramatic.
It really does. But they described it as a literal heaviness, a revulsion toward their own surroundings, and this agonizing detachment from their divine purpose.
But wait, I have to push back on that framing just a little. These monks literally walked into the desert to sit in caves and pray.
Right.
They actively chose an environment with zero external stimulation. So why were they treating this feeling like a demonic attack instead of just, the natural consequence of having absolutely nothing to do?
Well, because to them, the pain of it felt entirely disproportionate to the situation.
Ah, right.
Right, they were supposed to be fulfilled by their devotion, yet they were experiencing this profound psychological friction. They recognized that the feeling wasn't just empty time. It was an active, torturous yearning.
Okay, that makes sense. The intensity of it freaked them out.
Exactly. And then, if you fast forward to the 19th century, the cultural diagnosis shifted completely. The French popularized the term ennui.
Oh yeah, ennui, the classic moody artist vibe.
Yeah, very that. With the rise of the Industrial Revolution and the creation of this distinct leisure class, ennui actually became a status symbol. It was viewed primarily as a malaise for the idle rich, like a symptom of having too much wealth and no necessary labor.
Right, so the classic image of the aristocrat lounging on a velvet chaise, sighing because the caviar is too salty and the opera is just too predictable.
Spot on. And that era gave us the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, who formalized this really bleak view. He claimed human existence was essentially just a pendulum swinging endlessly between two poles.
Let me guess, wanting things and having things.
Basically, yeah. The sharp pain of wanting things we don't have, and the agonizing boredom of finally acquiring them and realizing they don't fulfill us.
That is incredibly bleak. But also, if boredom is just the tragic result of having all your needs met, then the modern era should have eradicated it entirely.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about it. I have infinite podcasts, infinite video games, every movie ever made, and just an endless stream of articles right in my pocket. It's like standing inside the world's largest all-you-can-eat buffet.
Right, you have everything.
Yeah. So if the understimulation or needs-met theory holds up, I should never experience a single second of boredom.
And that glaring contradiction is exactly what forced evolutionary biologists and neuroscientists to start looking deeper. The modern world is saturated with stimulation, yet boredom rates are actually climbing.
It's the buffet problem.
Right. And if you examine this through the lens of evolutionary biology, the puzzle gets significantly weirder. Consider the behavior of laboratory rodents.
Okay, I love a good rodent study. What do they do?
So when researchers place wild rodents in a captive, perfectly safe laboratory environment where all their food, water, and shelter needs are completely met, those animals will run kilometers on an exercise wheel every single night.
Wait, really? Kilometers?
Kilometers. They engage in this repetitive, intense physical exertion just to feel something.
But wild rodents don't do that, right? Like, if you put a wheel in a forest, a wild mouse isn't going to hop on for a midnight cardio session.
They almost never do.
Yeah.
In the wild, stress hormones and biological drives push the animal to forage, build, survive. The environment demands constant cognitive and physical engagement.
Because they're trying not to get eaten.
Exactly.
Huh.
But when you remove all environmental demands in a lab, those internal drives don't just evaporate. The animal is safe and fed, but evolution hasn't programmed it to sit still. Evolution programmed it to constantly interact with its environment to ensure survival.
Right.
So the core question becomes, why would natural selection wire an organism to feel incredibly restless and miserable when it is finally totally safe and resting?
Well, because safety is a dead end, right? If early humans just sat in a cave the moment they had enough berries for the afternoon, they wouldn't invent tools. They wouldn't explore new continents, and they just wouldn't advance. The misery must be a mechanism to force action.
And that perfectly brings us to philosopher Andreas Elpidoro and his book, The Anatomy of Boredom.
Oh, okay. Let's dig into that.
So Elpidoro proposes a functional theory that redefines the entire concept. He argues that boredom isn't a void. It is a vital regulatory mechanism, like you said, a biological alarm system.
A biological alarm system. I like that.
Yeah, he formally defines it as the painful realization of the lack of optimal cognitive engagement.
Okay, I want to focus on that word painful, because we usually think of pain as physical tissue damage, like, touching a hot stove.
Yep.
But Elpidor is saying the psychological discomfort of being bored serves the exact same physiological function. The fire burns your hand, so you pull back. The environment isn't engaging your brain, so your brain generates psychological pain to force you to go find something meaningful to do.
Yes, that is exactly it. And we can physically observe this alarm system firing when we put people into fMRI neuroimaging scanners.
Wait, how do you study boredom in a scanner? Do you just leave them in there?
You literally have to induce it. They put subjects into the scanner and have them perform incredibly monotonous tasks, like staring at a fixation cross on a screen for extended periods.
Oh, that sounds awful.
It is. Now, you might assume the resulting brain scan would show diminished activity, right? Like a brain powering down to conserve energy.
Yeah, I mean, that's the intuitive guess. If I'm bored, my brain must be in sleep mode. The lights are off.
The reality is the exact opposite. A bored brain is blazing with activity.
Really? Blazing?
Blazing. A major neural network called the default mode network, or DMN, lights up intensely. The DMN is your brain's hub for internal reflection, daydreaming, wandering thoughts, planning for the future.
Okay, so the internal world is super active.
Highly active. But neuroimaging reveals this massive functional disconnection. A distinct network called the salience network, specifically a region known as the anterior insula, fails to do its job.
Okay, neuroscience terms. Let's break that down. What is the anterior insula supposed to be doing in a healthy state?
Sure. Think of the anterior insula as a highly advanced switchboard operator. Its whole job is to monitor your internal thoughts and your external environment and decide what requires your attention.
Okay.
When you need to accomplish a task, the anterior insula grabs the signal from your internal network and hands it over to the executive control network, which directs your focus and actions outward.
Got it. It connects the inside to the outside.
Precisely. But during a state of boredom, that switchboard operator effectively drops the cables. The connection between your internal desires and your external actions just fails to materialize.
Oh, wow. I think I can visualize this. It's almost like it's not that your brain's engine is turned off, it's that your car's transmission is permanently stuck in neutral.
I love that analogy, yes.
Right. You have the gas pedal pushed all the way to the floor, the engine is revving at 7,000 RPMs, but because the anterior insula can't engage the gears, you aren't moving an inch. And meanwhile, the check engine light is blinding you.
That is perfect. That friction of revving in neutral is exactly the agony of boredom. Dopamine levels plummet because the brain isn't achieving any rewarding goals.
Right, because nothing is getting done.
Exactly. And concurrently, another brain region called the anterior cingulate cortex, which acts as the brain's conflict monitor, detects this massive discrepancy. It senses that you have high arousal and a desire to act, but zero environmental payoff. So it rings the alarm, generating that feeling of profound restlessness.
Okay, but wait. If my brain is stuck in neutral, screaming in pain, and basically starving for dopamine, how does that translate to the classic pop psychology advice that boredom breeds creativity?
Ah, the creativity myth.
Right. We constantly hear that we need to let kids be bored so they invent new games, or that our best ideas come when we have nothing to do. But if my cognitive transmission is broken, I don't feel creative. I just feel irritable.
So the link between boredom and creativity is real,
Yeah.
but it is highly conditional. It depends entirely on a hidden variable. And we can see this clearly in this really fascinating 2025 study published in the journal Education Sciences.
Oh, nice. Brand new research.
Very new. Dr. Mate Krenich and her research team at the University of Vienna and the University of Constance wanted to understand the exact mechanics of this relationship. So they observed 119 eighth-grade math students.
Eighth grade math. Prime territory for boredom.
Right, and they were specifically looking at how boredom interacts with the level of challenge the students were facing.
Okay, so they separated the feeling of boredom from the difficulty of the task that was causing it.
Exactly. And they identified two completely different states, boredom combined with being under-challenged and boredom combined with being over-challenged.
Interesting.
When students experienced boredom because the math was simply too easy, the researchers saw a massive spike in mathematical creativity.
Hold on, I need to understand the mechanics of that. If a student is sitting in a classroom totally under-challenged by basic fractions, aren't they just zoning out? Like, how does staring out the window equal a spike in mathematical creativity?
It all comes down to cognitive resources. Because the math task was too easy, it didn't require the students' full working memory. They had a massive surplus of cognitive power.
Okay, extra brain juice.
Right, and at the same time, their biological boredom alarm was ringing loudly, demanding optimal cognitive engagement. So, to shut off that painful alarm, their brains utilized that surplus working memory to seek out stimulation through something called associative thinking.
Associative thinking. What's that?
It's making novel, unexpected connections. They started looking for weird, complex ways to solve simple problems just to entertain their own neurology. The brain essentially manufactured its own puzzle to solve.
Wow. So the alarm demanded engagement, and because they had extra brain power lying around, they just built something new to satisfy it.
Precisely.
But what happens to the over-challenged students? Like the ones staring at a calculus problem they can't even begin to decode.
Creativity completely flatlines. For the over-challenged students, their working memory was entirely depleted, just trying to survive the sheer difficulty of the task. They had zero surplus cognitive power.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. Their boredom alarm is still running, but they have no resources left to engage in complex associative thinking. So their brains take the only available escape route. They retreat into effortless, low-value thoughts. They mentally drift away to think about what's for lunch or, a video they want to play later.
This maps so perfectly onto everyday life. I mean, it explains why you get your best, most lucrative ideas when you are doing something mildly boring but incredibly easy.
Like folding laundry.
Yes. Folding laundry, taking a shower, pulling weeds in the garden. You are under-challenged. You have surplus cognitive resources, and your brain goes hunting for a problem to solve to silence the alarm.
Exactly.
But if you are staring at a wildly complex, incredibly dense tax document, you don't suddenly compose a symphony or invent a new color. You just get exhausted, your brain shuts down, and you walk away to get a snack.
That distinction between under-challenge and over-challenge is really the key to unlocking the utility of boredom. But, when we zoom out to the societal level, we see a much darker side to this biological mechanism.
The darker side. How so?
Well, psychologists actually measure chronic states of this feeling using something called the boredom proneness scale.
Hmm.
Individuals who score high on this scale, meaning they basically live in a near constant state of unfulfilled revving in neutral, demonstrate significant correlations with depression, anxiety, dangerous risk-taking behaviors, and impulse shopping.
Wow. Let's go on to the socioeconomic aspect of that for a second, because the literature suggests that chronic boredom isn't just a personality quirk, right? It's heavily tied to marginalization.
Yes, absolutely.
But if boredom is simply an internal biological alarm pushing us toward meaning, how does systemic poverty or precarious work trigger that alarm chronically?
It fundamentally comes down to environmental agency. The biological alarm is designed to push you into action. But what happens when the environment actively blocks your ability to act?
Oh, I see.
In situations of systemic marginalization, whether it's working a precarious, highly repetitive job with no upward mobility or living in an environment starved of educational and creative resources, your agency is severely restricted. Your anterior insula is desperately trying to connect your internal drive to external meaningful goals. But the environment simply does not offer a viable path to execute those goals.
It's the car analogy again. The transmission is trying to engage, but someone has literally stolen the tires off the car. You want to move, but you are structurally trapped.
That's exactly it. So the alarm continues to ring endlessly, day after day. It transforms from a temporary, helpful push into a chronic, destructive hum. And when people are trapped in that state, they will eventually seek any available method to silence the alarm, even if those methods are destructive, like substance abuse or extreme risk-taking, just to force a massive spike of dopamine and override the system.
That is incredibly heavy, but it makes so much sense biologically, which actually brings me directly back to our Tuesday night couch scenario.
The endless scroll.
Yes, the scroll. If our brains are starving for meaningful engagement and we are suffering from this lack of connection, why does swiping through short-form videos make the feeling so much worse? I mean, our phones offer brightly colored, constantly shifting, hyper-stimulating content. Why doesn't that silence the alarm?
It's because of how that content interacts with the default mode network we discussed earlier.
Mhm.
The act of digital switching,
Yep.
rapidly skipping from one 15-second video to the next, fast-forwarding through podcasts, constantly hunting for the next micro-hit of entertainment, it actively sabotages the brain's internal rhythms.
How so?
When you engage in digital switching, you are preventing the default mode network from doing its restorative, reflective work.
Oh, I get it. So we aren't letting the brain rest in a daydreaming state, but we also aren't giving the executive control network a genuine, challenging task to accomplish.
Exactly.
We are straddling the worst of both worlds.
We are feeding our brains extremely low-effort dopamine hits. These microdoses act like cheap painkillers. They temporarily muffle the psychological pain of the boredom alarm, but they do absolutely nothing to resolve the underlying lack of optimal cognitive engagement.
So you are treating the symptom while actively making the disease worse.
Precisely. Furthermore, the constant barrage of high-intensity, low-effort stimulation raises your brain's baseline threshold for reward. After an hour of digital switching, normal reality like reading a book, having a slow conversation, going for a walk, it feels agonizingly dull by comparison.
Because we are breaking our own reward circuitry,
Exactly.
which is the exact mechanism behind the Kent State Study's findings. The students who spent 30 minutes doing homework felt less bored because homework actually engages the gears.
It demands effort.
Right. It requires a sustained, mildly challenging effort that utilizes working memory and satisfies the brain's craving for meaning. The social media scrolling just kept them trapped in neutral, revving the engine without moving.
Homework, hobbies that require physical skill, deep conversations, these activities demand active participation. They successfully close the neurological circuit that the boredom alarm is begging us to complete.
Man, we've covered some fascinating, complex ground today, and it completely reframes a feeling we all try to avoid. Boredom is not a failure of character. It is a highly evolved neurobiological alarm system designed to push you away from stagnation and toward meaning.
That's a perfect summary.
And if you want to harness that alarm for creativity, you need to ensure you are under-challenged, giving your brain the surplus power it needs to make novel connections.
Right.
And crucially, our reliance on rapid-fire digital switching is short-circuiting this vital alarm, trapping us in a loop of cheap dopamine and deep disengagement.
And, this biological perspective actually aligns beautifully with the work of the 20th century philosopher Martin Heidegger.
Oh, Heidegger, what did he have to say about this?
He wrote extensively about a concept he called profound boredom. For Heidegger, this wasn't the mundane annoyance of, waiting in line at the grocery store or sitting in a waiting room. Profound boredom is a heavy, existential state that strips away all the cheap distractions and daily illusions we use to occupy our time.
Wow.
When you are truly profoundly bored, you're left standing face to face with the weight of your own existence and the terrifying reality of your own freedom.
It strips away the noise and forces you to look at the blank canvas of your life, which honestly is intimidating. Most of us would rather look at our phones than confront our own freedom.
It is incredibly uncomfortable to sit in that silence and feel the friction of your own revving engine. But Heidegger argued, and the modern neuroimaging data we've discussed seems to entirely back him up, that enduring that acute discomfort is often the only mechanism we have to figure out what truly matters to us. It forces the ultimate question: what do I actually want to do with my limited time on this planet?
It's the friction that creates the spark, which leaves you with a final, somewhat provocative concept to mull over as we close out today's investigation. If this painful biological alarm is the very mechanism that pushed early humans to leave their caves, invent new tools, and explore across oceans,
Yeah.
and it's the exact same alarm that pushes your brain to come up with its most brilliant, unexpected ideas when you're just standing in the shower, what happens to our future if the tech world ultimately wins?
Oh, that's a scary thought.
Right. If Silicon Valley succeeds in engineering a seamlessly stimulating virtual world with absolutely zero boredom, a world where the biological alarm never has a chance to ring, would humanity ever be driven to create anything truly new again?
It really makes you wonder.
Something to deeply consider the next time you find your transmission stuck in neutral on the couch. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. If you enjoyed uncovering the science with us today, please follow and subscribe for more journeys into the unknown. Until next time, listen to your check engine light.